most being harmed by the incredible prices of energy as a result of failed energy policies or strategies. I want to yield to Congresswoman Yvette Harrell from New Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. There's no doubt we have a war raging between Russia and Ukraine. But let's make not any mistake at all. This president waged war on the American people, the American industry, the day he signed the executive order that would stop building the Keystone XL pipeline. Remember, that's 11,000 jobs that were lost at a stroke of a pen. And look where we are right now. This administration would trust fuels from Venezuela, from Iraq, from other nations, over the Permian Basin and other states in our nation that produce. The best thing we can be doing for our country and our allies is becoming energy independent. We should never put ourselves in a position to rely on foreign energy. Look what China's doing right now. This year alone, they will be building over 200 coal power plants. Why? Because they will not find themselves in a position where they have to rely on foreign energy, and neither should Americans. We should not, we cannot, and we must not do that. This uncertainty is why we're seeing the highest prices we've seen for gas ever. This uncertainty is why we are signaling to the industry that we don't know what we're doing. We have an administration that will not allow a lease sale on federal land. We have an administration that has stopped permitting. I mean, think about what we're talking about. This is hundreds of thousands of jobs, indirect and direct. This is our stability as a nation, and this is our global standing. It's crazy. And I got to tell you, crazy, this kind of insanity cannot sustain itself in a free society. We can do better, and we must do better for the American people. The people of New Mexico are depending on decisions made here and now so that they can understand their futures and the future of their children. And the people of America deserve better leadership than what they're seeing. Never should we think that foreign oil is better than American independence when it comes to energy. So I would just continue to push this administration to put Americans first and make the right type of decisions so that we can regain our global standing, our global trust, and more importantly, our global leadership. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Congressman August Pfluger.
Good morning. My name is August Pfluger. I represent Midland, Texas, Odessa, Texas, a large portion of the Permian Basin. You know, right now, as you've heard, the president is in the midst of announcing a ban on Russian oil, and that's great. But it's the first step, and I would say arguably it's the lesser of the steps. The most important step that we need right now is, will the president announce that he's going to unleash American energy? Is the president going to do everything he can to capitalize on the national security implications of our own production, our own supply? Later, we understand that the president may be traveling to Texas. In addition to his pre-planned meetings, what he should be doing is meeting with oil and gas executives and companies. Instead of calling on terrorist regimes to fulfill our needs, what he should be doing is calling on the domestic producers who know better than anybody else in the world how to produce the supply of energy that not only we need, but that our partners and allies around the world need. The Permian Basin is a strategic tool that nobody else in the United States has. The United States has the resources that no other country around the world has. You know, the president's first phone call should have been to the mayor of Midland, Texas, not to Maduro. Just 4 to 5 weeks ago, I was in Ukraine. I met with President Zelensky in advance of what we now know is a horrific war, the images that none of us can get out of our minds. What President Zelensky told me was that without the Nord Stream project, Putin would not have the leverage, the power, or the impetus to invade Ukraine. President Zelensky knows that energy security is national security. He understands the implications that being dependent on your enemies and your adversaries puts you in a position of weakness, and that's exactly what the assault on oil and gas has done. Biden's assault on the oil and gas industry has created an environment of weakness that the United States is clearly in. And instead of being energy dominant, we are now forcing ourselves and our partners and allies to be energy dependent on other countries. We should not rely on our enemies, our adversaries, for our energy needs. Mr. President, it is time to put Midland over Moscow. It is time to unleash American oil and gas. It is time for our partners and allies to depend on us and not on Russia for our energy needs. Enough is enough. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to a phenomenal advocate for the oil and gas industry, somebody who is leading on these issues, the ranking member of the Committee on Natural Resources, Mr. Bruce Westerman from Arkansas.
Thank you, August. I'm Bruce Westerman from Arkansas's 4th Congressional District, and we're sleeping in the bed that we made. That's what happens when you allow energy policy to be dictated by children in Europe, by woke investors on Wall Street, and by politicians who actually think that electric passenger vehicles are going to solve an energy crisis and a climate crisis. The policy we have is unsustainable, and we're seeing the results of it. When you look at energy policy, it should do at least 3 things. Number 1 is be reliable. This energy policy of the left is not reliable from a technical standpoint. It's also not reliable from a sourcing standpoint, as we're seeing now, where we're dependent on Russian oil and gas. Energy should be affordable. And we see right now with all-time high gas prices and oil prices that energy is definitely not affordable. Energy affects everything. We're getting ready to start planting crops across the world. Natural gas is the key ingredient to nitrogen fertilizer, which allows us to produce the food to feed the world. As energy cost goes up, the cost of everything's going to go up. Food costs are going to continue to rise. Transportation costs are going to continue to rise. And it's more than just the cost at the pump. And finally, the left's energy policy, contrary to what they say, is not cleaner. They're buying gas from Russia and other countries that produce it much less cleaner than what we produce. We've all heard about the Biden administration canceling the Keystone XL pipeline. Union welders in my district lost their job when that pipeline was closed. But when I talked to them, they said, did you realize this pipeline was going to use total renewable energy to pump the oil from Canada to the Gulf of the United States? It was actually green jobs being used to transport the oil. We produce energy cleaner and more efficiently, and we're better stewards of the environment here than any place else in the world. We don't need to be buying Russian energy, but we sure don't need to be buying Iranian energy or Venezuelan energy. We need to produce energy of all forms and all types here in the U.S. and do it better than anybody else in the world. Do it where we have reliable energy, where we have affordable energy, and where we have the cleanest energy. I now want to recognize and introduce our Republican whip from the great state of Louisiana, Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Bruce. We continue to stand with the people of Ukraine, and I think the whole world is admiring the strength and tenacity of President Zelensky and the great, strong people of Ukraine who are pushing back on Putin's barbaric invasion of these great people. But they need help, and there's a number of things that they've laid out. It's time for the United States to deliver and do our part to help the people of Ukraine to push Putin back. But one of the big pieces of leverage that President Biden gave Putin early off in his administration was on energy. And this is where President Biden can do something. Today, he's probably going to announce that he's reversing course, where just a few weeks ago he was begging Putin to produce more oil. Today, hopefully, he will call for a ban on Russian oil. The challenge is that President Biden still won't say yes to American energy, because to replace that Russian oil is the real critical step. And first of all, President Biden, stop begging dictators to produce the energy that we need here in America. Don't go to Russia. Don't go to Iran. Don't go to Venezuela when the answer is right beneath our feet. It's time for President Biden to say yes to American energy. And too often he's turned his back on the energy that we make cleaner, as my colleagues point out, than anyone else in the world. Oil is still going to be needed to run not only our economy, but the economies all around the world. And so the question is, where do we get it? And if they're worried about carbon emissions, we emit a whole lot less carbon to make energy producing oil and natural gas here in America than if it's made in Russia, or if it's made in Iran, or if it's made in Venezuela, or those other countries that President Biden is begging to produce the oil when it should be made here. Just last week, President Biden came to give a State of the Union. And in his speech, one of the things he said is, let's make more things in America. Except his words ring hollow when he says no to American energy, when people across the country are fed up with, just look at today, the highest price for a gallon of gasoline in the history of America is today. If you're filling up your tank, you're feeling the pain of a failed Biden strategy on energy because he's made our country dependent on foreign sources of oil when we could produce enough here in America. Specific things he did, of course, as my colleagues pointed out, the Keystone Pipeline. That's oil from Canada. They can send more oil through the Keystone Pipeline than we get from Russia. And he said no to that. There's just days before Putin invaded Ukraine, President Biden put a ban on all new leases and permits for oil and gas, all of them across America. Federal lands, private lands, banned it. He can reverse that today, and he needs to. Not a single new permit for a pipeline anywhere in America, or an LNG permit where we can be exporting more natural gas to our friends around the world. There are dozens of those permits sitting on the Biden administration's desk, ready to go, privately funded, to send secure American energy, cleanest in the world, to our allies so they don't need to get it from Putin or any other bad dictator. And when you think about the cost, just leading up to the invasion, Putin was pocketing $700 million a day from selling his oil to United States and Europe. Those days need to end. President Biden can end that today. And we would stand with him, but we continue to call on President Biden to do the right thing, say no to Russian oil, but then say yes to American oil. He can do it with the stroke of a pen, and we stand willing to work with him to get that done. We're going to continue to urge that to happen. We'll be happy to take some questions.
Another one of the things that President Zelensky has laid out that he'd like to see from the West and from the U.S. is for NATO to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I wonder what you think of that request from him.
Yeah, I know some of our colleagues just got back from Poland yesterday, and we're talking about that and a number of other initiatives. Obviously, those are all being discussed right now, as well as the different missile systems. He's asked very specifically for more surface-to-air systems. He's also asked for fighter jets. And I know there are conversations happening with a number of NATO countries that have the ability to provide Ukraine with the kind of planes that they could use, where their pilots are trained to use those planes. We could help those NATO countries as well. So all of that is being discussed, but time's of the essence. And this is where the Biden administration's moved incredibly slow months ago, when President Zelensky was asking for some of the basic missile systems that he still doesn't have today. Months ago, he was asking for those, and he was told no by the president.
Representative Scalise, I just wanted to look back a little bit. Given where we are right now, what rethinking can be done on President Trump's withholding of military aid to Zelensky as he pressured him to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden? And would you have done anything different in 2019 if you had known the importance of Zelensky in Ukraine in this moment today?
Well, first of all, and you look at that conversation, President Zelensky had called President Trump to thank him for the leadership that he provided. In fact, when Zelensky got elected, he said he modeled his campaign after President Trump's. And ultimately, he got the relief money that he was asking for. If you go back to when Joe Biden was vice president, he bragged about how he withheld $1 billion in aid to Ukraine when Joe Biden was vice president, because he said he wanted a prosecutor to get fired, who ultimately, from reports we saw, was fired. But President Trump stood with President Zelensky, and in fact, the two of them had a really good relationship. And when President Zelensky was asking for things like Javelin missiles that the Biden and Obama administration said no to, President Trump said yes and actually helped Ukraine get those tank-busting missiles that they needed and, frankly, they've been using. They could have surely used some of those surface-to-air missiles that they were asking for just a few months ago that President Biden said no to.
Last question. Do we, if this back and says, I don't care, you can ban my oil. If it doesn't work, do we just keep arming Ukrainians until they just can't fight anymore?
Well, they're fighting with incredible strength and resilience. And so I have confidence that the people of Ukraine are going to continue to push back. And I think Putin miscalculated the will and the determination of the people of Ukraine. But where this really works is if President Biden not just says no to Russian oil, we shouldn't be getting it anyway, even before the invasion of Ukraine. But you need to say yes to American energy to replace it. Our country's economy, as well as other allies all around the world, still use oil every single day. The question is where they're going to get it from. I would argue don't get it from Russia, but don't also go and beg countries like Iran or Venezuela to provide our needs. We can provide our needs here in America, and we were providing all of our needs and exporting energy to our allies all around the world. President Biden shut that down. He was proud of it. I hope he has a change of course, because Americans are paying the price and our European allies are paying the price for Biden's failed energy strategy.
Thanks, everyone.
And we'll do one last question.
Real fast on the omnibus, do you anticipate there will be a lot of Republican support, especially because it includes the Ukraine aid package? And is that something you think leadership is going to be encouraging?
We haven't seen a final package yet. I know there's talk that it may get filed this evening. We would like to see it, the final text. I'm very proud of the work that Kay Granger and her staff have done to make sure that our nation's defense is properly funded, because that was up in the air, and they've resolved that. They've got an agreement to properly fund defense and to keep important riders like the Hyde protections on life. Those are all protected as well. We still need to see if it's going to be multiple packages to vote on. That decision hasn't been made by the Speaker, but we're obviously very supportive of the defense side of this, and we would like to get that done quickly. Thank you all.
Do you have a question divided? Is that the preferred
We'd
strategy?
like to see a defense package.